Again, this reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda. This week's reading is The Law of Karma, Bondage or Soul Release. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. The epistle, or letter, of St. Paul to the Galatians contains this oft-quoted statement: "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." In other words, whatever he plants, he shall also harvest. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramhansa Yogananda tells a story from the life of the Benares saint, Trylon Bislama. A skeptic once determined to expose Trylanga as a charlatan. A large bucket of calcium lime mixture used in whitewashing walls was placed before the Swami. "Master," the materialist said in mock reverence, "I have brought you some clabbered milk. Please drink it." Trylanga unhesitatingly drained to the last drop the containerful of burning lime. In a few minutes, the evildoer fell to the ground in agony. "Help, Swami, help!" he cried. "I'm on fire! Forgive my wicked test!" The great yogi broke his habitual silence. "Scoffer," he said, "you did not realize when you offered me poison that my life is one with your own. Except for my knowledge that God is present in my stomach, as in every atom of creation, the lime would have killed me. Now that you know the divine meaning of boomerang, never again play tricks on anyone." The well-purged sinner, healed by Trylanga's words, slunk feebly away. Yogananda goes on to say, "The reversal of pain was not due to any volition of the master, but came about through unerring application of the law of justice, which upholds creation's farthest swinging orb. Men of God realization like Trylanga allow the divine law to operate instantaneously. They have banished forever all thwarting cross currents of ego. Not by reason alone, but by self-realization are the ins and outs of destiny fully understood. Their web, though tied forever to the post of ego motivation, is too intricate to be perceived as a single thread. Only great masters can see it with clarity. It is visible to them in all its workings, not from within the tangle, but from above, in superconsciousness. As Sri Krishna said in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, "He who beholds inaction in action, and action in inaction, is wise among men. He is one with the Spirit. He has attained the true goal of action, perfect freedom." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. And you can chant Om with me. I love that story of Trylanga Swami for so many reasons. First of all, Trylanga Swami is such a beautiful example of a great yogi. So the story goes, he was 300 years old and had added 1 pound for every year of life. And so he had a very large body, and he would walk around Benares. He was a disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and he would sometimes go into the Ganges and submerge himself so that only his head was showing, and he would stay that way, sometimes for days. Of course, this attracted great crowds. Whenever he would come into the area, people, even if they didn't know him, just the sight of him was shocking. Not only because he was 300 pounds, but because he also wore not a scrap of clothing. And so this, of course, made an impression on everyone, not only as a symbol of his renunciation, but it also embarrassed a few people. And Leslie, would you mind making it a little colder? Thanks. So, of course, the police, said there are laws against such public exposure. And so they, one day, assisted him to a jail cell and said, you can't do this. Put on clothes. He said no, or said nothing, because he kept silence most of the time. And they locked him up in the jail cell, and then a little bit later, they found him walking around on the roof of the prison, as Swamiji adds, for more people to see than ever before. And so they couldn't understand how it happened, so they brought him again into jail, and this time posted a guard outside the cell, and still they found him upstairs on the roof once again. So they finally just admitted defeat and left it. Another thing about Trylon Goswami is that he was once meditating with a devotee, and the devotee was praying for some dramatic divine experience. And so they were sitting, I think, in a temple. Yeah. And Trylanga said, okay, sit down here and let's meditate for a moment. And so they did. And then the idol, or the murti, I should say, of Kali, which was in the temple, opened the door and entered the room. The stone figure came to life and sat down with them and was speaking to them. And this devotee, of course, was just amazed and transformed by, well, maybe not transformed, but transfixed by the experience. And then after a time, Kali stood up and walked out and closed the door, and then when they opened the door again, she had returned to the stone image. And then Trylanga turned to his disciple and said, now what have you got? I mean, yes, you had this dramatic experience. Yes, it was very impressive, but how has it changed you? What has it done for you? Now, it isn't that he had no respect for miracles. Miracles are incredible because they reassure us that the divine is the one actually operating this world. And they can awaken great devotion. And yet, if we don't internalize those experiences, then it's not very different from firecrackers going off. And it's a great show, but at the end, back to my dumb old consciousness, at least speaking personally. And so, similarly, even Babaji said to Lahiri Mahashaya, my son, I will come whenever you call me. And so when Lahiri, this was when they met, and so then when Lahiri came back to the marts of men and was telling some of his friends about this amazing encounter with a saint in the Himalayas, near Raniket, and they said, you must have bumped your head or something, and dreamed the whole thing. He said, my guru said, whenever you call me, I will come. And either they said, yeah, prove it, or he felt that thought from them. And so he said, fine, let me go in, I'm going to go into this room, close the door, and I'm going to call my guru. And when I call out to you, you open the door. And so they sort of, okay, go ahead, knowing nothing would happen. So he went into the room, he closed the door, he sat down in lotus pose. I think he put 2 blankets down, one for him and one for Babaji, an empty one. And he prayed to his guru to appear. And Babaji appeared, right there, in the flesh. And his words, though this turned out to be a miracle for, of course, everyone who then later witnessed it, and they opened the door and they saw him and they couldn't believe. They knew there was no way he could have entered this room. There he was. And they even touched his body, I think. And he said, let halva be prepared. And so they made some halva and he ate with them and spoke with them. And it was all very dramatic. And then after a time, either he disappeared or they left the room and then he left. And Lahiri even added, many souls were drawn to the spiritual path as a result of that miracle. Great. But Babaji's words when he appeared to Lahiri, when Lahiri called him, said, my son, do you call me for a trifle? And you say, well, if people are brought to the spiritual path, is that a trifle? But he's saying miracles are, to be given by those who have drawn them through devotion. and not just passed out willy-nilly to inspire. Anyone can believe in God if they see Babaji appear before them. That's enough. And some people, that may be their karma. But what he was saying behind that is we shouldn't demand that. We shouldn't require that. And you might ask, well, but why? I mean, if God could just do a miracle, then it would solve everything, and then I could be sure that He's there. And in fact, a cousin of mine said that to me once. I'll believe in God when I see one miracle and not before. And first of all, I think there are many miracles in his life that he chooses not to see as miracles. But that kind of doubt is not, I'll believe in God if I can just see one miracle. Please, Lord. Not with devotion, not with positive expectation that there could be a miracle, but I dare you to show me a miracle because I know it can't happen. That kind of attitude. It's not only that God says, fine. It's not that there's any kind of punishment. It's that we close off our receptivity to miracles or to any breath of devotion or divine grace when we have a critical attitude, when we have a negative doubt. I know it can't happen. Well, then it probably can't happen. And you've probably heard of stories where even Master's brother-in-law was so against God and Divine Mother, and Master brought him to Dakshineshwar and didn't make any arrangements for their lunch. And then his brother, whose name was Satish, brother-in-law, came up to him and said, I want my lunch! And Yoganandaji said, Divine Mother is taking care of us. And he said, once and for all, I'd like to see your Divine Mother give us lunch without making preparations. And at that moment, the temple priest came up to them and said, my son, to Yoganandaji, I saw you and your party enter, and I felt inspired by your devotion. And even though it's against the temple custom, I have set aside lunch for you. Please join us in having this lunch. And the brother-in-law, and he never spoke another word to Yogananda, or at least not for a lot. He said, as punishment for I'm punishing myself for my doubt and criticism. This is the tapasya I will do, because he felt so ashamed. Now we can say, well, but he had negative doubt, he had criticism, so why did the miracle come? Well, the karmic intricacies are very complex, though he may have had a lot of criticism. He was saying, I want to see it. And he was asking it of a saint. Now he had the karma to be married to the sister of a saint. So good karma for him. But then he became, after this experience, he became a Kriyaban. He took Kriya initiation, as did his wife. And they both, as Master said, were making notable progress with Kriya. So how did he go all the way from the deepest, darkest doubter to a Kriyaban? Of course the answer is he didn't. He wasn't the deepest, darkest doubter. He was a Kriyaban who just before getting Kriya was a little irritable. You see, when people approach us and say, for example, suppose, as often happens when we get on the spiritual path, we start meditating, and we tell people, what do? I meditate. Oh yeah? Really? Waste of time if you ask me. Criticism, anger, and so on. Why? I mean, why have that reaction? Usually, we are angry or critical, often, because we're hurt. Otherwise, why would we be angry? I mean, why not just be indifferent? I meditate. Oh yeah, great. Well, I walk around the park. I mean, nothing's wrong with that, but it's just like, that's what you do, that's what I do, great. That's a neutral reaction. Why should there be an angry reaction, a negative reaction? Usually, it's because that person has some negative association with meditation or spirituality. And it could be because they, on some level, know they ought to do the same thing and they don't want to. So the example that you present as a reminder to them, even if you don't say a word, like, you should meditate, that's not very helpful, they feel that. Sometimes Master said, when you hold up a mirror to others, they don't necessarily like what they see, so they can either change or break the mirror. And this is why often saints get persecuted, because they say, what I have done you can do. As Christ said to his disciples, The things I have done, meaning the miracles, you will do, and greater things. This is one of the great teachings of his that is so in line with Sanatana Dharma and is overlooked a lot in Christianity. Because if we think he's the greatest and no one could ever approach him, well, that's not what he said. He said, you will do greater things than I did. And there's an example of that. Jesus raised the dead, Lazarus, as many of the Indian yogis have raised dead people back to life. Jesus did that. One of his disciples, Peter, also raised a person from the dead, resurrected them. And so just to say that the disciple who was not the master was able to do the same thing by calling on the master's power. I mean, what better example than that do we have of the Guru saying, I am showing you what you can and will become. Not you can become if you happen to work hard enough. Not you can become if you happen to get lucky and win the saint lottery and then, oh, okay, I guess we have to make you a saint too. It's not like that. You will become. Swamiji once was asked to act in a pageant and play the role of Jesus Christ at the Garden of Gethsemane. And for those of you who don't know the story, you probably know that Christ was crucified and killed. Before that, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane praying because he saw what would happen. And it wasn't that he was praying for it not to happen, but he was praying for, well, if he was praying for it not to happen, not for his sake, but for the sake of all the people who did it and what would follow from that. And so he even asked all his disciples to stay up and meditate with him, and they all fell asleep. And then he woke them up again, and he said, stay up, pray with me. And they fell asleep again. And that's where he's made his statement, the body is willing, the mind is willing, but the flesh is weak. Or the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, if you've heard that. So Swamiji was supposed to play this role of Jesus in Gethsemane. And the way he was directed was to just sit in this one area and just sigh sadly, because they had missed the point a little bit of the whole thing. And so Swami said the reason I was asked to play the part was because I had a beard. And he said, and no one in the 1940s, no one wore beards at all. In fact, when he was walking down the street with a beard, sometimes people would call out, "Hey, Fidel Castro!" If you know who that is. He's a dictator of Cuba, and he's had this big beard. And so they would call Swamiji that. And so Master asked Swamiji to grow the beard, perhaps to make him look older, because he was sometimes half the age of the people in his audience, and the beard made him look a little older. And there may have been more significance. In any case, Swamiji, when he came out of that experience of playing Jesus in the garden, Master said to him, I heard from the people at that function that you really looked like Christ. And Swamiji said, well, sir, I'd rather be like Christ than just look like him. And you would imagine that, we just be like him. And Master said, that will come. That will come. And those of us who knew Swamiji in his later years, he reminded us of Christ. We could see the ray of the divine light through him. Master was saying, you too will become free. You have no choice. You started free as a spark of the divine, went on this long journey that we tell at the Festival of Light, if you remember that, and returned back. Because of duality, you have to return back eventually to freedom. And you have no choice in the matter. That's the bad news if you really don't want to be free or don't believe in God, is that, sorry, you're going to end up one with him anyway. But you can take as long as you like. Terrifyingly long amounts of time. Terrifying to the devotee who says, I can't even wait another day. Please, God, come to me. It says in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is a great scripture, Master said, though often it's misinterpreted as just a worldly poem of pleasure. It says, Master's commentary on a stanza from that poem is that some of the souls who are wandering in delusion at the beginning of a day of Brahma are still in delusion at the end of that day of Brahma, which is, billions and billions of years. That's the bad news. On the other hand, there's good news, which is, suppose we have been wandering for billions and billions of years. The mercy of reincarnation is we don't really know it. It's like, am I 700 billion years old or 7 years old? I don't really know. Well, more than 7, but that's the mercy of reincarnation and us not knowing what we did in the past. As Master said, if you remembered all your lives, you would remember all the bad things that you did. And then he said to that audience anyway, and in your lives you had plenty of bad things. He said, most of you. And so we start afresh. Sometimes there is a lingering sense of defeat or worry or insecurity or different little things that we carry for no reason. There's no reason to feel insecure or shy or hesitant, but sometimes we have that feeling. It's strange to me because in the West, where Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are very strong, you would expect that, and people, often devotees have this kind of sad outlook, because one of the misinterpreted teachings of the Judeo-Christian religion is that mankind, we, are fundamentally flawed, fundamentally imperfect. God is perfect, Jesus is perfect also, we are not. And so in order to connect with God, we have to go through Jesus, but He's the only one who became perfected, no one before or after. We basically have to ask for His favor to become worthy. Not every Christian believes this by any means, and I told you Jesus' statement completely contradicts that. You will do greater things than I did. But this is one of the dogmas. Every religion, unfortunately, is prone to certain dogmas, certain false statements that then are pounded in. And so if people feel guilty or feel like I'm not that much of a devotee, it's often blamed. Well, you have to understand, you're told from the beginning that you're no good. The beautiful thing of Sanatana Dharma is it says, you are essentially perfect. You are a spark of the divine. You're the same as God. There's just a little bit of confusion in the mind that prevents you from knowing that. And all you have to do is improve your knowing, says Krishna to Arjuna. Master said, the soul is like gold, and even if gold is buried under centuries of mud, it remains gold. And so we have that encouragement. We are perfect. Even Jesus said, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. What is more dramatic than that, than saying, be perfect, He's perfect, be perfect like Him. But no, it gets lost. But so I would think that if you're following the teachings of Sanatana Dharma and Yoga, that we would find many more people without that same kind of guilty complex. I myself had it, and to some sense have it. And it's not because I grew up in the West, because I didn't have exposure really to that. When someone said you're inherently flawed, I thought, well, speak for yourself. I just wouldn't buy it. It didn't seem fair. Why should I be evil? I didn't ask to be born. I happened to be here. It just didn't seem fair. It didn't seem kind. And so, yet, we find on the spiritual path a lot of yogis walking around like this too, just not feeling necessarily so good about themselves, which is unhelpful, but it's common and it's real. Now, it doesn't mean that we should walk around, I'm a yogi, I practice Kriya. You may bow if you like. It's not that we should be arrogant and exaggerate the ego in that way, but we shouldn't exaggerate it in the other way. I'm nothing. I'm horrible. In fact, there's a joke I can't resist telling. There was a rabbi in a synagogue, in a Jewish temple, saying, Lord, Lord, I am nothing before Thee. And then the assistant rabbi came in and, inspired by this, also said, Lord, I too am nothing. I am nothing. And then the janitor from the back of the room who happened to come across them thought, oh, how beautiful. And he said, Lord, I too am nothing. And the rabbi said to the other one, look who thinks he's nothing. Saying, oh, I'm nothing. You can't be nothing. And of course, it's fun. But I think sometimes the reason why as devotees we feel this is partly because maybe we're disappointed that we're here. Just like rats I thought I had made it in the last life, and I'm still here. Arr! And it's to be expected. Sri Yukteswar said, those who are too good for this world are adorning some other. And so, in other words, if we really were too perfect for this world, we wouldn't be here. So as long as we're here, we can accept it. But also remember, you can grow spiritually much more here in the material universe than you can in the astral world. Why? Because in the astral world, there's no motivation. Everything is perfect, the weather is beautiful, as Master said, even the snow is warm and multicolored, and everything is enjoyable. In the autobiography of a yogi, Sri Yukteswar describes all the pleasures of the astral world. And we go, also beings, or our souls, you could say, are separated on different levels, so that people like you are around you. And people who are perhaps more materialistic and so on are not near you. There's not this masala like we have here on earth. And so, you're pretty happy. People remain in the astral world sometimes for hundreds of years. Brigu told Swamiji he had been between his last life and this life, he was there for 700 years. It's a long time. Not necessarily time in the astral world is measured differently, but it's a lot of time on earth. And so, on earth we have lots of motivation for wanting to get out of this samsara. Plenty. And that's good, because it's a goad, it's a prod to make us grow. And this brings me to this other point of the great thing of the affirmation of gratitude. Because gratitude completes the cycle, and obviously we should feel gratitude for any gifts that we receive. And as Master said, look to the giver behind each gift, the one giver. Take anything you receive, but thank God. Thank the person if you can, but thank God also. Because not only does it complete the cycle, but it opens the heart and it prevents the sense of entitlement or other weird thoughts to creep in. And it's just gracious. If you give a gift to somebody and they go, I mean, you don't necessarily feel that great. Like, hey, I had the thought to give you the Meister Bach. You could at least smile or something. Say thank you, maybe. So, the thing is that this cycle has to be completed. And I wanted to tell you a story of an experience that I had a hard time feeling grateful for. Because what about the bad things that happen to us? And by bad, I mean those things that we don't like, those things that hurt us. It's important to remember, as I think it was Jyotish who said last weekend, in the questions and answers, he said, Swamiji defined good karma and bad karma in the following way. Good things are things that draw us to God. Bad things are things that take us away from God. And by the way, that's why we shouldn't get too judgmental or, any of this about anything. Because if someone is bad or wrong, it just means they're moving away from God. They can't go that far. Even if they go 1,000 miles in the wrong direction, still, compared to infinity, is nothing. And eventually they'll turn around. And similarly with us, good things are things that take us toward God. So Swamiji said, as Jyotishji explained, good karma is that which takes us toward God. Bad karma is that which takes us away from God. So you tell me, what if someone is completely wealthy, completely healthy, completely happy, and never has to do anything, and certainly also, therefore, never thinks about God? It's not that the one follows the other, but suppose a person has such a life. Is that good karma? And similarly, when we get brought to our knees and our heart's broken in 2 pieces, but then we finally say, okay, Lord, I think I can only count on you in this life. Is that bad karma? So, I was in a situation where when I got onto the spiritual path, my family was very opposed to this, primarily my father. And so there were a lot of efforts to try to convince me that I was doing the wrong thing. Or couldn't I do it in a more moderate way? Now, meanwhile, I was still in graduate school. I hadn't come to Ananda full time, so this was even before that. And even when I came to Ananda, I was a school teacher and working in a school and, had a normal-looking job and all those things. So this was even before that. And so I had been arguing with my father about this for a long time because it was either argue or die, so I thought I might as well argue back. But I wasn't arguing from a point of view of I'm going to prove that I'm right, because he was committed to the fact that I was wrong. And so when someone is decided that you're wrong, you can't really do anything about their opinion. As Master said, such a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. Meaning they disregard the facts, they disregard the truth, there's no room except for what they think, so they're of the same opinion no matter what happens. So I got good at showing why his argument was wrong. Meaning finding the hole in it. And in all fairness to him, he had enough a sense of truth to admit that yes, that is a flaw in the argument. Because he could have just said, no it's not, yes it is, no it's not, yes it is. He did, he admitted that when there was a logical problem. And so I came home for Christmas one year, and we were at my cousin's house also, and he and my cousin brought me into a room and sat me down, and my father began by saying, I have read a book on cults. Cults are bad. And I said, yes, cults are bad. And they take people's money. Yes, they do. Bad ones, yeah, they do. They separate people from their families. Yes, they do. And they draw all the attention to the leadership and themselves and make everyone slaves. I said, that's true, I've heard of those things. And that's exactly what Ananda is. I said, how do you know? Have you read a single book that's been published by Ananda? Have you visited a single colony? Have you read any of the websites? Have you met one person from Ananda? How do you know that that's the case for the spiritual group that I'm within? He said, well, I don't have time to do all that kind of reading. I said, well, you have time for your opinions, but if they're uninformed, I don't see why I should listen to them. And he said, basically, the way every argument ended, well, that's a good point, but I'm still right. So that was fine. But I was prepared for that kind of attack. But then my cousin, who is a brilliant person, exceedingly brilliant, very smart man, he came after me this time. And he had lots of good attacks and different things kind of wearing me down, and I would occasionally say, basically asking the judge for a 5-minute suspension so I could go to the restroom or something and kind of compose myself if we're going back to the interrogation. And this went back and forth, and I was having a harder and harder time with his arguments because he was so brilliant. It was stretching my reason and logic. And then I went to the bathroom one other time, and I would just kind of walk around in the bathroom saying, okay, if he says this, then I'm going to say that. And if he brings up that, then I'm going to say, oh yeah, and what about you, and all these things. Okay, so I've got this plan, and I think I can make it. And then suddenly this thought arrived in my mind, you're going to lose. You're not going to win this argument based on logic. You're going to be outfoxed on this one. And I realized that it could easily be true, because not only was this man really smart, but I didn't have as much practice with his methods like my dad, so I could get surprised and caught and trapped. So I said, that's fine. I'm going to create a barrier here between my head and my heart. I'm going to put a brick wall here, so that no matter how confused my mind gets, if I do lose, I'm not going to let that confusion enter my heart, because I know in my heart this is the right thing for me. So no matter, even if my head is taken off, I won't go farther than that. And that was the only security I had, and thank God I did do that, because I went back in and just went down. He said, how do you know that if you follow this path, you won't end up regretting it later? He said, I have heard stories that people have done such a thing and thought it was real, and then were deeply disappointed, and their lives were ruined, and they regretted all those years that they wasted. And what is your proof that that won't happen to you? And don't say it's because you're smart. Smart has nothing to do with it. What is your basis for knowing you're doing the right thing and you won't regret it? What do you say? I mean, in all honesty, what can you say to that? Say, this is my proof that I know 100%. We don't know what's going to happen outwardly. And we probably remember past disappointments where we thought we were right and we weren't. And so, in any moment, how can we be sure that there's not even a 0.1% chance that we're going in the wrong direction? On the basis of logic, there is no answer. And if you said, I know because I know, it's not valid. It's an impossible question to answer, which was very good of him to come up with, because then I lost. So I don't know. And so then things generally left that way, and then I went to the bathroom, and of course I cried my heart out because it hurt. Not that I was shaken, because I had this brick wall. So I said, it doesn't matter, there's no head left, but the heart is still intact, but barely. It hurt so much because, I mean, this is my cousin. This is someone I grew up with. Why should this much viciousness come after me from someone I cared about, who I loved? How could he overlook that fact and be willing to grind me into the dust? Now, from his point of view, I'm sure it was. It's only out of love that I'm torturing you because I'm trying to protect you. And this is my way of protecting you from harm, which maybe should be rethought a little bit. But in any case, I did say, though, well, now that I'm confused, I have to find an answer to this. And it took me a long time, a lot longer than it should have. I was just sitting and racking my brain and drying my eyes, and then, it took hours for me to say, what is the answer to this? And then finally, it occurred to me, I don't know. I can't prove that this is the right thing, but I have faith. I have faith that I'm going in the right direction. I have faith that God is benevolent and will guide me to the right thing. And even if this turns out to be the wrong thing for me, it's not the ultimate wrong thing. He'll move me to the right thing. And my faith is born of experience, not of belief. I hope it's true. I've had so many miracles in my life. I've had so many rescues. The fact that I even found Autobiography of a Yogi in the first place was a huge gift that changed my life. Why would God withdraw his interest in me? And if he did, it would only be because I couldn't perceive his help. I know that that's true. I couldn't offer this as an explanation to my cousin because faith is beyond logic. But it is better than logic. Because logic doesn't necessarily refer to anything that's true. It just says, if this is true, then this follows. Faith is born of, I experienced this. I know it's true. It doesn't matter if you know it's true. It doesn't matter if you believe it. That's for your own process. But for me, I know it's true. And so this became a great foundation for this doubt which he had exposed in me. Because I didn't provide that answer right away. It took me a while to find it. And I said, this is a great thing that I've discovered. And so in time, after quite some time, probably months, years, I became very grateful for that experience because it gave me a strength that I didn't have before. And so it was easy to feel grateful for that. And could I then say it was bad karma and that it was such an awful thing that happened? I had to have this weakness exposed. And then I was the one who gained from the whole thing. So I'll end with one last story of gratitude. I was meeting Swami Kriyananda for the first time. This was in Italy, in Assisi, in the temple there. Swamiji was living in Italy at that time. And he had been there for maybe at least 4 or 5 years, I think. And I had found Ananda in America, and so I was moving to California, visiting California, Ananda Village and so on. And then I moved into the Ananda Palo Alto community in California, but there was no Swamiji except in Italy. If you wanted to see him, you had to go to Italy. He had planned to maybe come back in 1998, and then he canceled his trip. And so by now it was 1999. And so I just thought, well, if I want to meet him, I have to go to Italy. So I went to Italy, and when I got there, they said, well, Swamiji is scheduled to give the Saturday satsang, but we don't know if he will because he's been ill for such a long time. And so I thought, oh, well, and I thought, well, I'm here, and he knows I'm coming, and whether he, comes or not, I wasn't too scared. And then they said, well, we're going to have the satsang in any case. So we all gathered in the temple Saturday afternoon. And then I heard these whispers that Swami is here, he is going to give the satsang. And so of course I started to get excited. Of course I'd never met him before. I'd seen his videos, I'd read his books, I'd heard his audio, but I hadn't met him. And I expected when Swamiji entered that there would be sort of this quiet little hush, because of course he'd been ill, and there would be someone quietly walking down the aisle and so on to the front of the room. And instead, it was as if the doors were blown off their hinges. This huge wave of energy, not a big sound, but just almost as if there were boom. And we all turned, and Swamiji came striding down the aisle full of energy. I'd never seen anyone or felt anyone like that before. Even the biggest movie star or president, I had met a few of them in passing, and his magnetism was way bigger than anything like that. And he seemed 8 feet tall to me. And then he went up onto the altar area and he sat down and said, well, because there is a Kriya initiation tonight, let's spend a longer time in meditation. He talked a little bit. It was in Italian and I had the translation thing, someone translating for me. But then we meditated a long time. And so I tried to meditate because there was Swamiji and here I am, and I should have thought, well, a chance to meditate with Swami, but instead it was just like seeing if I could get his attention. He hadn't stopped in his tracks and said, Dharmarajan is here! Nothing, maybe, you never know, would there be some kind of nothing. And then I sat there more just hoping he would notice me in some way. Maybe I'd open my eyes and see him looking at me. No. And then I was getting more and more hot, tense, and kind of contorted, twisted, just like, thought I might explode under all this pressure of desire. And then I thought, well, I shouldn't, here I am with Swamiji for the first time in my life, and this is how I'm feeling, this is not right. And so I thought, how can I get out of this? And then the thought came to me, but here I am, trying to think of one more thing I can get from Swamiji. And think about all that he's given me already, in terms of his books, in terms of Ananda even existing, and republishing the autobiography of a yogi in its first edition, of training the people who trained the person who then met me in my college and introduced me to Ananda. Everything that is meaningful to me has come through him without me even having met him. Let me just be grateful rather than say one more thing I require. I'll feel grateful. And as soon as I said thank you, Swamiji, inside, I felt this coolness descend on me, and I felt very relaxed. And I knew I had done the right thing, and I felt a calmness. So then he finished the satsang and he came out, and I followed, though. Still grateful, I still followed him along with a few other people. And he came to his car, because in those days he was still driving his car back and forth. And I couldn't help, Swamiji, I'm Dharmarajan. And he said, oh, you're Dharmarajan. Somehow I thought you'd be taller. And I was really kind of speechless at that one. And then he said, isn't it interesting how we build up impressions of people? And I just thought, yes, it is interesting. I couldn't think anything And then he said, well, I hope we'll get a chance to talk while you're here, and so on. And then he left. And it was only later that I realized that when he said, isn't it interesting how we build up impressions of people, that he was saying, what impression of me have you built up? And leave it aside. Get to know me as I am. Get to know me inside. Don't worry about whatever your mind thinks that I am, and so on. And so, again, it was that thought of gratitude. So try to practice that when you can. When something comes up that's just not fair, ask Divine Mother. You can say to Divine Mother, it's totally not fair. But then say, help me to understand how this is actually a blessing in disguise. Thick disguise, but still, is there something positive I can get out of this? And in that way, gratitude for whatever karma comes is easy.